Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our event about identifying on iNaturalist and how you can help. A few reminders as we get started. So this webinar is being recorded, yes, and we will share the slides and the links afterwards for your future reference or in case you miss anything. Please use the Q&A feature of Zoom to ask questions, and we will be sharing some useful links for you to reference in the chat, and like I said, we'll share those afterwards as well, but the chat will be closed due to the number of people who are joining. I want to thank the folks behind the scenes, my colleagues Allison Young and Arya Natarajan, who will help answer questions that can easily be answered by text, and Walker Irving, who will be helping run the polls that we'll have, and will also be sharing some links in chat. And yes, we are recording this. So my name is Dr. Carrie Seltzer. I'm the head of engagement for iNaturalist, and I'm joined by my colleague Tony Iwani, our community and support coordinator, who's going to be guiding us through most of today's presentation. And we are excited that you're all taking the time to learn about this. And to get us started, we're going to start with the big picture and the challenges that face biodiversity. They're immense, but there's some good news. As our world changes, there's over 1 million species that may be threatened with extinction this century. And in order to address this looming biodiversity crisis, we need both people who care about biodiversity and have expertise and understanding about biodiversity, and we need more data to help inform decisions to protect biodiversity. The good news is that there are things that you can do to help. You can help protect species, and we are going to talk today about one of those ways. So, iNaturalist is uniquely able to capture global biodiversity data thanks to people like you. Over the last 17 years, over 500,000 species have been documented on iNaturalist, which is about 25% of the world's described species. This makes it the single most biodiverse data set on Earth. And as a result, there have been more than 6,000 scientific studies that have used data from iNaturalist. Just to give a few of the kinds of impacts that have come from iNaturalist, there have been new species discovered, invasive species are detected on iNaturalist, and iNaturalist is used to protect threatened species as well. We've got some links in chat if you want to check out more about hear more of those stories, and explore some of the science behind it. The reason this all works is because we've got a global collaboration of people who are making observations and people who are helping identify those observations. Just this hour that you're watching this now, we expect more than 6,000 observations to be added and more than 15,000 identifications. And this knowledge can be shared within regions, within countries, but also around the world, as you can see from this snapshot, connecting where in the world someone was when they added an identification to the observation that they were adding an identification to. So this real-time collaboration is what makes this all possible, because iNaturalist is a community capable of generating a lot of data. Next slide. This community is diverse. There are so many different people involved in iNaturalist. There are people on every continent using iNaturalist. We have people who are brand new to nature, and we have people who have expertise they've developed over decades. We have people who pick up iNaturalist once a year to people who spend several hours a day on iNaturalist. We've got enthusiastic teenagers who are eager to learn, and we've got people who have long since retired who are still excited to learn and still have so much to contribute. There are dozens of languages used on iNaturalist, and so many different devices that people use to interact with iNaturalist, and cameras they use to record observations. We've got so many people involved in this process, but in order to really grow this community and grow biodiversity expertise in the world, we need more people involved in the process of identifying, not just in the process of making observations. And I want to emphasize that everyone, every single person watching this, you have something that you are uniquely positioned to contribute. And I hope that over the course of this hour, this webinar will help you figure out what that is. So before we jump into the content, we have a quick poll. You should see this pop up on your device. And there's a quick question about how you have been interacting with iNaturalist. We advertise this webinar in a lot of different ways. So for example, are you only using the iNaturalist mobile app? Are you only using the website? Maybe you're only using Seek by iNaturalist, which is also an app that we've created. Or are you using two or more of these? So since people interact with iNaturalist in a lot of different ways, we're really curious to see who has shown up to this audience. And especially for those of you who have not been using the website, we're excited to introduce to you so many of the features that make it easier for you to contribute identifications. So now we've got the results of this poll. Thank you everyone for answering. And 47% of you only use the iNaturalist mobile app. 5% of you only use the website. 3% of you only use Seek. And 45% of you are using two or more of these. So almost 50% of you are only interacting with iNaturalist so far through a mobile device. So I'm excited to help show what else is possible in the website. We'll be focused on that today, but we can address some mobile related questions as well. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Tony. Thank you, Tony.
All right, thank you, Carrie. As Carrie said, I'm Tony Iwani, iNet's Community and Support Coordinator, and the talk today is about identifying observations on iNet and how to do so even if you're not an expert, but you still want to help out and you still want to learn. So what I'm going to go over is what identifications on iNaturalist are, why we need more people adding accurate identifications to iNaturalist, how to use the identify page on the iNaturalist website, which is really kind of our main tool that allows people to really go through observations quickly and add identifications and comments. I'm going to teach you how to search for and identify what we call unknown observations or observations that don't have an identification. And if we have some time at the end, we'll answer some questions. Just a reminder, iNaturalist is pretty much a three-stage process. So we have people who encounter an organism, they'll take a photo of it and post it as an observation on iNaturalist. And when you do that, you share it with anyone in the iNat community and actually anyone in the world because iNat records are open data. And basically, once an observation is up there, the iNaturalist community and you, of course, can discuss your findings and add identifications, add comments, talk about what it might be, where to find them, and stuff like that. So we're going to be focusing on this third part of the process. And the two main ways people interact with observations are through identifications and comments. There are other ways to interact, but I'm just going to focus on these two today. Here's an example of both. So I was in Mexico in September and photographed a really cool, enormous carpenter bee. But I don't know anything about Mexican bees. So I knew enough that it was probably a carpenter bee. So what I did was I posted my observation. I added an ID here at the genus, large carpenter bees. And then people who are looking for bees in Mexico to identify, I assume, were able to find it and add their own IDs. So Andy Plant Base found it and he suggested an ID of this species, Zelicopa fimbriata. And then he added a comment, and comments are basically just text. and where he got the attention of another person that he thinks could identify this, Jorge and Rita, who then added his own identification to my observation. So we have two IDs here marked by the red arrow and a comment. Right? And this is how iNaturalist works. People share their knowledge and volunteer their time to help make data accurate and help people learn about what they saw. And so comments are just contributions of text. They could be pretty much anything. You could post a link to maybe a source that you're using. You could just say, whoa, really cool photo. You could ask a question. So sometimes people will post a photo of a plant, of maybe an insect on a plant, and they are not indicating which one the observation's for. So you can ask them a question. Hey, is this for the plant or the insect? You could say maybe, I think it's maybe it's this, but I don't want to add an ID yet. Um, and yeah, just any way to kind of, interact and discuss the observation like you would on pretty much any social media site. But what makes iNat different is we also include what we call identifications. So for example, there are a lot of Facebook ID groups, right? Like, identify this spider or identify this fish or, on Reddit or something like that. And you can post your photo and someone will help you identify it. They'll say, it's species X. But that's just like a comment, basically. That identification cannot really be searched for in any sort of meaningful way, and it doesn't kind of show where that organism is on the tree of life. And what iNaturalist IDs do is they're labels that you add to an observation, and they are attached to iNaturalist taxonomic database, basically what we call, the tree of life. So we have the middle here, and then there are different branches in the tree of life. There are plants, and then different types of plants below that. There are vertebrates here in blue, but different families and orders of vertebrates. We have reptiles, mammals, birds, and so on and so forth with like arthropods with arachnids and insects. And of course, fungi are their own little funky kingdom. Um, and so, for example, I saw an observation and I identified it as, I'm pretty sure it's in the cockroaches and termites order. So that would be here on the branch of the tree of life of insects. And that means that someone searching for insects would find this observation because it's now been labeled as a taxon. And a taxon is anything on the tree of life from species up to kingdom or subspecies or up to kingdom. And because they're searching for insects, anything below insects will show up in that search. So really kind of adding these IDs make the observation like searchable and filterable and really kind of add to the value of the iNaturalist data set, aside from, just telling the person what they saw. And so identifications, I'm just going to go over a few more things about them. They can be added by anyone to anyone else's observation. So any iNat user can come across an observation and add an identification to it. All identifications are weighted the same regardless of who added them. So if 7 people added an identification to an observation, they would all be weighted the same when we calculate what we call the community taxon. And I'll go over that in a bit. They can be made at any taxonomic level on the tree of life, and that you can base that on the evidence at hand and your own knowledge. So if there's like a blurry photo that you know is a bird but doesn't have any other kind of details that you can see, you could identify it at birds. And maybe someone else who could actually, who knows birds in that area could maybe recognize it. Maybe they can't, but allows you to choose at which level you think the evidence supports and your own knowledge supports. So for example, if I saw this bird here on the right, I don't know anything about African birds. I could definitely identify it as a bird, and then someone could search for it, and someone who knows African birds would be able to look at this nice clear photo and probably be able to identify it down to species, which it looks like people did. Each person gets one active ID per observation. So if you add an ID, then maybe find out you're wrong, you can withdraw your ID, or you can add another ID, and your previous one will be withdrawn. And so only one active ID per person counts toward what we call the community taxon. And it's when people withdraw and maybe add a new ID, that shows anyone like how the community arrived at the current ID. As I mentioned, you can withdraw your ID. You can delete your ID. We don't really want people to do that unless it's like a clear mistake. Like sometimes I'll make a typo and just add the wrong thing unintentionally, and I'll delete that sometimes. When you add an ID, you can add a remark with your ID. And so, if I knew anything about African birds, I could say, okay, this is a lilac-breasted roller. And I can tell that because of the short dark bill and the lilac breast plumage or anything like that to help someone kind of understand why you added your ID. And most importantly, identifications are used for the observations taxon and its community taxon. And there should be a link in the chat that goes more into detail about those, but I'm just going to show you sort of what that means in this example. So in this example, someone posted an observation of a snake. And this first account, iNat staff test account, said, okay, I know what this is. This is a Western rattlesnake. And then I came along and I added an ID and said, actually, this is a gopher snake, which is something that rattlesnakes can often be misidentified as in California. And so what we have here are two different identifications. And what iNaturalist does is it tries to take every ID added to the observation, every active ID, and kind of find out where they meet and also kind of like weigh like if there were like 4 or 5 people who said gopher snake here, those would outweigh the one rattlesnake ID and change the community taxon. But in this case, there's just two. So iNaturalist goes, okay, there's these two identifications. Where do they meet on the tree of life? Well, these are two different families of snakes, so they're not in the same family. We'll have to go back probably one more branch up the tree of life. And both people agree that this is a snake of some kind. So iNaturalist says, okay, right now the community agrees that this is a snake. And then someone looking for snakes to identify could find this and maybe and weigh in themselves and start getting closer toward the truth of what this might be. So the community taxon is just a way for iNaturalists to try and understand and display what the community thinks this is at the moment. Um, so why do we add observer IDs and why do we need more people adding IDs? Well, the narrative around iNat often is, oh, that's a cool fly. Post it to iNaturalist and somebody will identify it for you. And that's true. But these are not magical identifications, right? These identifications on iNaturalist are the work of volunteers of the iNaturalist community from around the world who are spending their time helping people learn about what they saw and curating a data set and making sure it's accurate and can be used for research and conservation. Um, and so I just checked in the numbers at the beginning of the month, and about 312 million observations have been added to iNaturalist by November 1st, which is amazing. And about 4.9 million accounts have added those observations. However, only about 475,000 accounts have ever added an identification for someone else. So that's less than 10% of the community has actually added an identification for another user. And probably a very small amount of that have added most of the IDs on iNaturalist. Some people have added several million. I'm currently at close to 160,000. Um, don't let those numbers intimidate you, but I just kind of want to show you it's a very small amount of people who add a lot of the IDs. And what we'd like to do is get more people adding IDs and becoming part of that process. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to my browser and show you how to use the iNaturalist Identify page, which is, as I said, our main tool for adding IDs and comments to observations. So just switch here. All right, so this is the iNaturalist website. The website is available on any browser. It's not really mobile friendly, so we recommend a laptop or desktop computer. Once you log in, you'll see this header here, and if you click on the um, identify label here, it will take you to the identify page, shockingly. And the identify page, what that does is it shows you the most recent observations from anywhere around the world of any taxon that are still what we call needs ID, that still need the community to weigh in and try and get this thing down to species or to as fine a level as possible. And so you'll see a grid of 30 observations. You can change the thumbnail size if you want. You can filter by taxon. You can filter by place. And there are more filters here if you want. And I'm going to go over some of those, but you can even sort by the date added. You can also go by random, which I like, which kind of brings up any observation, which means I can maybe find old ones that still need help. By default, it shows you observations that you have not reviewed, which means you have not added an ID to. Because again, this page is really for helping other people. And you can use it this way, but by far the most common or the best way to use the identify page is to use what we call the identify modal or the pop-up. So click on any observation here. I'll click on this one, and you'll see this pop-up. And so the observation will show here. We've got the observation taxon. We see that it still needs ID. Any photos or sounds attached to it will be here, and I can switch between them. Um, it's going to show the info page by default, which shows the location. You can zoom in and out, and you can lock the zoom level if you want as you go through observations. Who made it, how many observations they have, so you kind of know if they're experienced iNat user or not, when it was made, accuracy, country, which app was used. If you don't see anything here, it's probably made via the website. You can click this to open it up in a new window. And you'll see any ID and comment here. Below here, you can click one of these to add an ID or a comment. You can mark it as reviewed. You can, let's see here. You can mark it as captive or cultivated if it's like a garden plant or a pet or a zoo animal. You can add it to your favorites if you want. So you can use this with your mouse. I could add an ID and type something in here. However, this page is really meant for use with your keyboard. And if you go to the bottom left-hand corner here and click on this keyboard icon, you will see a list of the keyboard shortcuts available for this page. So for example, if I wanted to add an ID, I could just tap I with on my keyboard, or if I want to add a comment, I could press C. If I want to zoom in on a photo, I press Z. I can go between observations by pressing the right or left arrows. Shift right or left will take me to these different tabs up here, and Command or Alt and the arrows will shuffle between the various photos or sounds on the observation. So I'm going to show you how that works. I'm going to close this, and if I press Z, I can zoom in on the photo, and I can do Command right to go to the next photo and zoom in on that if I want to. I can press Shift right to go to suggestions, annotations, or data quality. I'm not going to go over annotations or data quality today, but I will show you suggestions in a moment. And that's pretty much how this works. I highly recommend remembering and learning the keyboard shortcuts. So let me go to the next observation. And, as I go through these observations, and if I want to help identify them, there's a lot of things I don't know, right? I don't know most taxa around the world. So this is not a particularly useful set of observations for me to identify. So what I can do is I'm going to get out of the modal. I know how to identify things in California pretty well. So if I go to place here and go to California, and now I'm seeing observations in California that need an identification, including some of the ones we've already seen. And I'm not that great with fungi, so unfortunately, this is not a great set for me, but it may be good for you. I can maybe find this one, look at it, and I think that it's probably an eastern fox squirrel, so I can just click agree here. And now I can move on to the next one. I'm not sure about that. I'm going to mark it as reviewed because I don't need to see it again. When you mark something as reviewed, it means that it won't show up in your identify queue in the future. It doesn't mean that other people won't see it. It just means like, okay, I've looked at this. I don't think I can add anything to it. I don't want to see it again when I'm identifying. Do the same thing here. I'm not sure what that is, so I'll mark it as reviewed. And again, it's okay to not add an ID. You should only add IDs when you can accurately identify it. So a lot of these I'm not that good at. However, that doesn't mean I can. That doesn't mean I can't add. I can't be helpful here. So I'm pretty good at lizards in California. So if I filter by lizards, I will now see observations of lizards in California that still need ID. And this is something I can probably help out with a bit more. So I'm going to start here. I can look at the location. I can see that 2 people have disagreed here, which is why the ID is at lizards. And if I zoom in, I know enough about this area and about lizards in California that I agree it's a Western fence lizard, so I can click agree here. And so I've added my ID. If someone else agrees that it's a Western fence lizard, this will then change to Western fence lizard because more than 2/3 of the community agree at that level. And I can go on to the next one. I press Z again, agree that's a Western fence lizard. And now it's at research grade. And it's also been marked as reviewed because I've added an identification to it. And so with this set of filters, I can do a lot more good because I'm seeing a bunch of observations that I think I can probably help out with. No, so this one I'm not sure about. What I can do is if I go shift right, I can go to the suggestion screen. And with suggestions, that allows you to kind of do some searches to kind of either to see what's around, to see what this might be. And you can choose which source. Right now, I'm using visually similar, which means it's using computer vision to take a look at the photo. And then it's filtering by the genus that is the parent of the current ID. So it's filtering by this genus. It's saying, okay, visually similar, it's one of these species. And it also shows me a map of where these suggested species are in relation to where the observation is. So a lot of these, just they may be visually similar, but they're not close at all. So this is probably not correct. I am not sure if this is um, a side blotch lizard or a fence lizard. Some people may be shouting at me and know exactly what it is, but that's awesome. You can always add your own ID. And so now it's showing me visually similar within any lizard. And you know what? I'm still not sure about these. So you know what? I'm just going to move on to the next one. And again, it's fine to not identify something if you don't know how to do it. I'll press Z to zoom in here. This looks correct. Oh, and actually, no, I know it's a Western fence lizard. So I pressed I and added that. So I made a mistake here. When I added my new ID, it just withdrew my old one. And so this is my active ID here. And so when you get like a nice set of observations that you think you can identify, this becomes a really powerful tool. I'll agree with this one here. All right. So that's how you use the identify page. Again, I really recommend if you have an area of knowledge, to use the filters to try and get a set of observations that you can really kind of go through and add a lot of value to. And let me go back to my webinar. And I think we have a poll, Carrie.
Great. So we are curious to know in this audience, how many species can you confidently identify now? For some of you, it may be none. That's totally fine. Maybe it's a few, maybe it's several, and I know we've got at least a few experts or very experienced naturalists on here, and we're interested to see what the spread is in this audience. And while you're responding to that, I know, Tony, you've been on iNaturalist a really long time. You are now a very experienced naturalist with a incredible expertise. But how would you have answered this when you started using iNaturalist?
Well, my very first observation from 2008 was a sea otter, and I was pretty confident about that because I think it's the only sea otter in the world, the only species of sea otter in the world. So I knew a few, but I've learned a lot more since then, especially, just using iNaturalist and, meeting up with people from iNaturalist, going out on hikes with them and having them teach me, and showing me what they know and I can show them what I know. So we're all kind of learning from each other and teaching each other at the same time.
That's awesome. Well, the biggest group of respondents that we had in the poll was a few. So 37% of people said that they can confidently identify a few species right now. That is awesome, and that's a great place to start. 8%, this was actually the smallest group, 8% said none. That's great. Everybody starts somewhere. 34% said several, and 21% said many. This is awesome. So, with that in mind now, back to you, Tony.
All right, thanks, Carrie. So for those of you who said none or a few or several, there is a way you can still help out and you can learn on iNaturalist. And I kind of call it passing the baton because the way I think about the iNaturalist identification system is that it's somewhat like a relay. where I could take the baton, i.e. the ID, and I could take it as far as I can, as far as my knowledge allows me, and I can then leave it there, and the next person who maybe knows more than me can take the baton and get the ID even finer, maybe down to species, if possible. And so anyone can be part of this relay. And I'm going to show you, if you really don't know a whole lot about nature, but you know enough to say something is an animal, something is a plant, something's a fungus, or even down to say something, oh, this is a mammal, or, this is a shark, or this is a cactus. This is how you can help out and get observations seen by the right people and take the baton as far as you can. Um, so what happens is that sometimes people post observations without any identification at all. And that's totally fine. Maybe you don't have a good internet connection. Maybe you want to ID it later. Maybe you just don't know what it is. And you just want to get it up on iNaturalist. Again, that's fine, but it makes it hard for your observation to be seen. Because, for example, if I posted this photo of a fly and I didn't add an identification to it, anyone looking for flies to identify, similar to how I was looking for lizards to identify, um, anyone looking for flies to identify would not find it because there's no ID attached to it. There's no taxonomic label linking it to a branch in the tree of life. And so what you can do is you can go and find these observations, these what we call unknown observations, and remove them from this taxonomic limbo and at least make them more findable by people who can probably take the identification further than you can. So to do that, it's pretty easy. You go to the identify page, you go to filters over here, and under categories, click on this icon right here. It's a dotted leaf outline with a question mark, and that is how you filter for what we call unknown observations. And I'm going to show you how to do that real quickly. I'm going to go back to the identify page. I'm going to remove these filters, and I will go right here. And now I'm seeing a whole bunch of observations that have no identification at all. So how can I help with these? Sometimes these are pretty difficult. Looks like someone called this a midge. I think that's probably correct because I did work at a wetland at one point. So what I can do is I can do non-biting midges here. Put that, and if I tab down to save and press return, I've added an ID, and now someone looking for that will be able to find it, and hopefully that's correct, or they could correct me. A lot of these I'm not sure of, so I'm just going to mark them as reviewed. Actually, no, I'm almost certain that's a beetle of some kind. If I didn't know it was a beetle, I could just label it insect because it's clearly an insect. So I will just copy this here. And now someone looking for beetles will be able to find it. This is definitely a crustacean of some kind. So I could just label it crustaceans. And then someone who knows more about crustaceans can find it and identify it to a finer level. But I've now made it findable. Okay, I'm going to mark some of these as I'm not sure. All right, this is clearly a plant, right? So I could just label this plants. I could also maybe, if it doesn't look like a conifer or it doesn't look like a moss, I could say, okay, this is a flowering plant. But it's okay just to go to plants. This, if I look at it closer, so this is in California. I'm pretty sure I know what this is, so I can go to suggestions. And let's say I'm not sure exactly, but it's looking like this is probably in the genus Baccharis based on some of these suggestions. So what I can do is I can click on one of these, and that takes me to the coyote brush species page. And if I go down, I will see where it fits in iNaturalist taxonomy. And I like to be conservative with my IDs because adding a wrong ID makes it more difficult to correct for the community to correct. So I'm going to go right now. This is the suggestion is this species. I'm going to go up to the genus Baccharis because just my knowledge kind of lets me know that that's what it probably is. If I click on genus Baccharis, I get taken to that page and I can select this taxon. And I can add it at probably a safer ID level than my own knowledge kind of allows me. And so I use the suggestions a lot to try and find out where something might be. I'm not sure what this is. All right, this is clearly a fungus, so I could just label it fungi. If I look closer, looks like a moss, which I can label, yeah, mosses. And again, you don't have to know a whole lot. You could also just label this plants if that's all you can get it to. This looks like a plant as well. I have no idea what it is, but adding plants will help someone find it. And as you can see, it's pretty easy to just kind of go along here and try and get these down to a taxonomic level that will be helpful. And that's how you identify unknowns. It's pretty easy. It can be a lot of fun, especially it allows you to kind of see what people are seeing all around the world of any taxon. And you can kind of just start learning a little bit about, maybe if I identify something as an animal and someone is able to refine that, then I'll know more next time once they do. And let me just go back to my slides now. So that's identifying unknowns. And what's cool is you can watch others pick up the baton. So this is a plant that I saw in Africa, or sorry, an observation of a plant from Africa that I saw. I know nothing about African plants, but I know enough to say, okay, I think this is a monocot, like a grass or an orchid, or something in that of that type. So I identified it as a monocot. And within 22 minutes, another user, Diana Studer, who identifies plants in Africa, she probably found this because of my identification. She was able to identify it down to genus, cedar orchids. And, it's pretty satisfying. And now, I could also ask her questions. I could say, oh, how do you know this is an orchid if I didn't know enough? But it is cool to just kind of watch people take up that baton and take it further. And it's pretty satisfying, I think. Now, that does bring up what happens when someone refines an ID that you've added. You are going to really want to go here and click this agree button, right? You're like, okay, well, if Diana says so, that looks right to me, and I want to interact with this somehow. So I just want to click agree because I want to be right too. Well, the problem is you should only agree to an ID if you can independently verify the taxon and back it up with evidence if asked, right? So if I agreed with Diana's ID here and someone said, Tony, how do you know this is a satyr orchid? All I would be able to say is, oh, well, Diana said so. And that's not particularly scientific. It doesn't generate quality data, right? Um, if Diana's wrong and then I'm wrong, that means there are two identifications that kind of need to be corrected instead of just one. Because like anyone can make mistakes, anyone can be wrong, and so you should be able to independently be able to verify something. And if you don't know how to, you can ask. You can say, I could ask her, how do I know this is a satyr orchid? What am I looking for? And she could tell me I could do some of my own research and then maybe figure out, okay, I think that's correct as well. So it's the start of a conversation, but I do want to really emphasize you should not agree with something or add an ID that you cannot back up yourself. Wrong IDs make it much harder for the community ID to be corrected. And as an example, here's a fake observation that I put together on our test server. Let's say someone posted a photo of a lichen. It looks like a moss, and so someone identified it as a moss. And then someone else is like, "Oh, example user must be correct. I think it's a moss as well." Now, if these two people don't withdraw their IDs, it will take 5 more correct IDs to outweigh these 2 wrong ones. So there's a real consequence to being wrong and to not withdrawing your ID. So in general, I like to identify at a higher level unless I'm really sure about something, or to just skip it. Because the point of this webinar is that we want lots of people who have different areas of knowledge to be able to add their IDs. And it's okay to not add one if you don't think you know what something is. And now that I've kind of gone over some of the pitfalls or some of the ways mistakes can create issues on iNaturalist, we have a new poll, Carrie.
Yeah, so I know it's difficult sometimes to choose among just two options, but please pick which option describes you. It could be, I am afraid of making mistakes, or I can't wait to get started with identifying. I want to acknowledge that we have a lot of people with a lot of expertise, or at least some expertise, but we also have some new people. And one of the exciting but also challenging things about iNaturalist is that we do have this incredibly wide spectrum. And I hope that no matter where you are on the spectrum, that there is something that you're learning from this. But it was something that I hear a lot from professional, especially honestly, especially professionals, is that they're still afraid of making mistakes. This is amazing. So the results of this poll show that it is split exactly 50-50. 50% of you are afraid of making mistakes, and 50% of you can't wait to get started with identifying. I genuinely had no idea what the results of this were going to look like. So this is fascinating. I want to talk a little bit to each of these groups independently. So first, if you are the kind of person who is afraid of making mistakes, the first thing I want you to know um, is that it's part of learning. Mistakes are absolutely part of learning, and everyone makes mistakes. So it's something that I think everyone needs to be aware of. And we and the nice thing about iNaturalist is that mistakes can always be corrected on iNaturalist. So it's a bit of a safe place to make mistakes in that way. So if this is you and it's 50% of you, you are not alone. I want you all to be a little less afraid of making mistakes. Tony's going to talk about what you can do. We're going to talk about how you can correct mistakes. Okay, now the people who said they can't wait to get started identifying. Awesome. You are not so afraid of making mistakes, and that is great. Um, but like Tony said, make sure that you can justify your identifications based on evidence, especially if someone asks. We encourage evidence-based dialogue on iNaturalist. But also be aware that even you will make mistakes. Even experts make mistakes in their area of expertise. Sometimes we move too fast. It's okay. Everyone makes mistakes. But maybe if this is half of you, maybe sometimes you should be a little more afraid of making mistakes. I love that this is split 50-50. Let's talk
Yeah.
about this a little bit more, the psychology behind this. So the Dunning-Kruger effect is something known from psychology where people who are new to something may go from knowing nothing to knowing a little bit, and their confidence may increase dramatically over that period. But they still have a lot to learn. They just don't know how much they have to learn yet. And I want to be clear that this is a very human thing. This happens across all domains. This is not unique to identifying. Absolutely everyone is susceptible to this in some way or another. So I want you to be aware of it. But then often once you pass maybe this peak of ignorance, when you have a lot of confidence but maybe not a lot of skill yet, you may then be at the point where you feel like you know nothing. You have very low confidence. Perhaps you are in the valley of despair. But then, as your competence increases, you learn more and more. You've made a few mistakes, but you've learned from them. You've asked people for clarification. You travel up this slope of enlightenment to the plateau of expertise. So I have no idea where the 50% of you who are afraid are on this spectrum, and I have no idea where those of you who are really confident are on this spectrum either. But I think this is something we should all keep in mind as we interact with people on iNaturalist and as we all learn more about identifying biodiversity.
All right. Anything else, Carrie? Sorry about the Dunning-Kruger effect.
No, I think this is
Okay.
great. Now, Tony, tell us what happens if you're wrong.
Okay, so let's say I add an identification, and I found out I'm wrong. Like someone points out, they say, "Oh, actually, this is, You might have thought it was a spider, but actually this is a harvestman. Note that the body is in one section, not two, not visibly split into two sections. There are a few things I could do. So I could just withdraw my ID, which means it's not counting toward the community taxon. And anywhere on the website and on our new app, if you go to the ID, if you on the website, if you click on this little down arrow, this little chevron, you can have the option to withdraw your ID. And again, that'll leave it there. It'll kind of strike it out, but it won't be counting toward the community taxon. And this happens to me, quite a bit, even still. And so, someone will point out that I'm wrong, and I'll be like, okay, I'm going to withdraw right now because I don't have enough expertise to add anything else to this. A few things you can do. You could withdraw your ID and you could ask the other person to explain their ID to you. And that'll help you learn and maybe understand how to not make the same mistake in the future. Again, we really encourage civil evidence-based dialogue. And if they explain it to you and they're able to cite some evidence that you can kind of look up on your own and you feel confident that they're correct, you could agree with their ID. That will withdraw your old one and add the new potentially correct one to the observation. Um, but yeah, there are ways, and there are ways to do this, and I really encourage people to stay on top of your notifications because anytime you add an ID to something, when people add IDs or comments, you will be notified about it. And you can kind of follow up there and, engage in a dialogue or correct your mistakes. Or, someone actually could be wrong, and you're right, and you could explain to them, like citing evidence. Actually, I think I'm right here because of X, Y, and Z. And again, engage in that dialogue. The community taxon is all about is a summary of these discussions and kind of these choices that the community makes. So it may sound ridiculous, right? You saw me like going to an observation that was clearly a plant and labeling it a plant, which doesn't seem like it's adding a whole lot of value, but actually it does. And I wanted you to take it from an expert. This is Dr. Keith Wilmot. He's a lepidopterist who studies butterflies. And he likes to go through our NAT observations. And he and some colleagues actually came across a butterfly from Ecuador a few years ago that was entirely new to science. They were able to actually describe it. This is just from a student who was doing an iNat project for her college class. And she made a photo that became a new butterfly species description. So I'm just going to play this 1-minute video. Hopefully you can hear it of what he has to say about this whole process.
Yeah, so I spend a lot of time identifying images on iNaturalist, typically focusing on general regions that I know, that I know pretty well, and trying to identify images down to species. But the whole identifying enterprise is a huge community effort that starts with a number of people who focus on identifying images down to particular groups, say to families or subfamilies, and then that makes those images accessible for people like me who are more focused on identifying them down to species. So there's a role for all kinds of different levels of knowledge in terms of filtering from insect down to butterfly, down to the family, down to the point where somebody like me is going to pick it up and then identify it down to species. And so I really appreciate the work of those, the people who are focusing on these kind of higher level categories that make images available for people like me to identify species and find those kinds of records.
All right, hopefully that was a bit inspirational. And we're going to wrap up here. Just a few reminders. Remember, if you don't know what something is and you can't reliably identify it, you can skip it. If you're identifying unknowns, sometimes people may kind of give you a sarcastic response. They might have said, "Yeah, I know it's a plant. That's not why I posted this. I want to know what species it is." You can, if you're identifying unknowns, when you add the ID, you can add a remark saying, "I'm identifying this just to try and get other people to find it." You can also link to an FAQ, which should be showing up in the chat, that explains to people why people may be adding IDs like these. If you come across observations that are of like pets or clearly garden plants, landscape plants, or zoo animals, please mark them as non-wild by pressing X on the identify page. That will keep iNet's data accurate. Remember those keyboard shortcuts and definitely use the suggestions tab. And I really recommend the way kind of I do it, especially as you're learning. to maybe kind of get some suggestions, but maybe go up a few taxonomic levels before adding an ID. Following notifications, and use your words. If you're not sure about something, if you have a question, please do so in a comment. That is, we're not going to learn anything, and we're not going to be able to communicate unless we communicate. Okay, last poll.
Yeah, all right. So we would love to get a sense for how deep do people want to dive into this after today? Can you commit to adding 3 identifications today? 5, 10, 20? Where are you at? Let us know. And we will get to some questions. I know there are so many questions in the chat. We unfortunately won't be able to get to anywhere near all of them, but we will try to point people to helpful resources and address a couple of the most common questions live. Awesome. Okay, so the results are in, and 45% of people commit to adding 3 identifications today. That is awesome. Awesome way to get started. 25% of people commit to 5, 18% 10, and 12% 20. That is awesome. So, Tony, tell us more
All
about
right.
making it a habit.
Yeah, so I make it a habit. I try to do, and a lot of people I know, like they'll start their day maybe with breakfast, making some IDs. I kind of do it throughout the day because I'm on the site all the time and I'll just take little breaks to just kind of get in there and identify. Maybe just try for 5 to 10 minutes a day. There should be a link in the chat that shows you that has a bookmark for identifying unknowns. But any identify kind of search you make, like I did lizards in California, I could bookmark that and always see like lizards in California that I can identify. And I have a few bookmarks so I can kind of like um, change things up. Again, learn those keyboard shortcuts. It takes a little while, but they become kind of second nature. Check your notifications and take your feedback into account. It's a great way to correct any mistakes. And it's also a great way to learn. Like once you start kind of getting these kind of finer IDs, you start understanding a lot more about, oh, this is okay. I think all orchids look like this, or I'm actually pretty good at identifying, at differentiating like caterpillars and fly larvae now, because I do a lot of arthropod identifications, and I'm just kind of learning from the community. Remember to start slowly. Just do a few, kind of see if you're on the right track, and also just have fun. This should not be like, shouldn't feel like a job. It should be enjoyable. It should be a way for you to learn and feel like you are contributing because you are, as long as you're making accurate IDs. And with that, we've got a few questions. We've got time for a few questions, I should say, Carrie.
Yeah, so since 50% of the people who are attending have been interacting with iNaturalist on a mobile device, I think it'd be really great to talk a little bit about how you can do this from your phone. It looks a little bit different and it's hard to use the website on the phone. It's possible. It's not as easy, but you can absolutely add identifications to other people's observations from your phone too. So, Tony, tell us about it.
All right, can you see my phone?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is the new iNaturalist app for iPhones. It will be available for Android, hopefully sooner rather than later. And this is you can do something similar on the Android app as it currently is. But basically what you want to do is you want to go to the Explore screen, which is in this app, if you tap on the magnifying glass on the bottom. And there are a few different views you can use. Um, I can just go to an area that maybe I'm familiar with. Maybe I'm familiar with this area. I can redo my search. And that shows me observations made in that area. And if I go to filters in the upper right-hand corner, I can I can I can filter again for like maybe lizards or something. And I could remove research grade. I'm not going to filter for lizards now, but I can just tap down here on quality grade and remove research grade. So I'm only looking for things that need ID. If I apply those filters and then go here, I can scroll through here, and there's a lot of mushrooms right now, which I'm not good at. But I do know my redwoods pretty well. This looks like a redwood. So if I tap on the agree thing here on the right, I know you can't see my taps. I can agree with the ID and add an ID to it.
Tony, can you show us again how you got from the orange blob to
Oh, sorry.
this view of
Yeah, so
observation?
on the bottom left-hand corner here, you'll see three icons, a map, a grid, and three lines that are a list. So there's a map view, a grid view, and a list view. I like using the list view because I get a lot of information. This is also in advanced mode in the app. It's a little complicated. But I can also filter for unknowns as well. I could go back to filters in the upper right-hand corner. And if I scroll all the way to the right here, I can find the unknowns. And I am actually going to go worldwide here. So if I tap on location and tap on worldwide, I can now see all needs ID observations of unknowns. And I can start going through those and adding IDs if I want. And this is a pretty good thing to do if you are, waiting in line, waiting for a bus or something, rather than like doom scroll or like have an influencer sell you something. You could actually contribute to iNat data by making these identifications on your phone, which I think is a lot of fun. Again, it's not as efficient, but it's something you can do when you're out and about and you have some time to do something.
Awesome. And once I'm adding identifications and then other people are adding identifications afterwards, I'll get some notifications. You've mentioned staying up
Oh
on
yeah.
notifications. Where should I look for those notifications and how can I manage them if I become so prolific that they become overwhelming?
Yeah, so in the app, there's an activity. Sorry, I turn off the app view, but on the website, you have notifications here on the upper right-hand corner. You can click on,
I don't understand.
sorry, Siri. You can click on the notifications up here. You will probably also be getting a daily update email that shows you kind of new updates and new notifications. On your dashboard, if you go to your homepage on the website, you will see some updates. It's taking a moment to load here. And you can revisit those. And what I'm going to show you, though, is that if you go to your account settings and go to notifications, let's say, at first, I would recommend having all your notifications turned on so you can kind of see what feedback you're getting. But if you if you're starting to get overwhelmed by notifications and there's some like you just don't think are worth following up on, you can actually go to notifications in your account settings and choose to turn some of them off. So for example, I've turned off notifications for confirming IDs. So if I identify something as a Western fence lizard and someone adds an ID of the exact same species to that observation, I feel like I don't need to be notified about that because I'm confident in my ID. So I've turned off notifications for confirming IDs. Also, in general, I'm not really a subspecies person. So if I identified a Western fence lizard and someone identifies it to a subspecies of Western fence lizard, that's not something I particularly feel like I need to be notified about, and I can turn those off as well. So there are a few options here that you can check out that will help you cut down on some notifications that that you don't feel the need to follow up on.
Thanks, Tony. We also got some questions about research grade. So what makes an observation research grade? And like, is that the ultimate aspiration for all observations?
I think research grade would be great. Let me just try and find an observation here that is research grade. Oh, okay. So we were just in Columbia for the Living Data Conference. So a research grade observation, it means that basically the observation has media evidence, so either photo or sound that the community can evaluate. It has a date and it has a location. So you can see here, this is where I saw this ladybug. And you can see this is the photo of what I saw, and I've got a date, a time. And what it means is that the community agrees. That means more than 2/3 of the community agrees at the species level. So we've got three people who have added an ID here, and we all agree it's an Asian lady beetle. Someone identified it beyond Asian lady beetle down to subspecies. But the community taxon is at species. So basically, what we're saying here is, okay, the community has agreed at a pretty fine taxonomic level here, And so it's not going to be in the identify queue. And we're actually going to send this to our data partners like GBIF, where people can actually export the data. You can also export the data on iNat, but this just means that the community is reasonably confident that this is this species. Not everything is going to get to species. For example, a lot of spiders require, a microscope and microscopic photos of their genitals because that's how each species is differentiated. So maybe for most spiders, you can only get down to family or genus, and that's fine. It's better to be sitting at that level than to have like an incorrect species ID, right? We want the iNat data set to be accurate. And if it starts getting inaccurate by people adding IDs that the evidence doesn't support, that means it's not going to be as useful for science or conservation or for anyone who's learning.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We are at time. There is so much more that we could explore. I encourage you, if you have questions about iNaturalist that haven't been answered, please check out help.inaturalist.org. And I'll just close with a reminder that, of course, no one can do everything, but everyone can do something. So I hope that today you have found the something. And if you go to the next slide, I hope you can answer this question: what will you do? Thank you all for your time. And on the next slide, I have just again a couple of reminders that this was recorded. So later today, we will email you a link to the recording and send the links shared in chat. And if you're watching the recording, you can find the links in the video description. Thank you everyone for your time, and I look forward to seeing you on iNaturalist.
Thank you. Thanks, all.